the "it's not fair" type of parable. And there's a bunch of them where you start to hear God's or Christ's interpretation of the kingdom of God, and it just doesn't seem fair. It goes against a lot of the things that our culture teaches us. And this is one of them. And it's, if you work harder, you should be paid more. But this is about gift. It's all about gift and the gift of grace. And so he is setting it up, and he has this beautiful story about this vineyard owner and about all these workers. And so I'm going to turn it over for you, and you can read us the story.
So to continue on with comparisons, our reading today is from Matthew 20, 1 through 16. We're going to talk about the laborers in the vineyard. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers in his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also, go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. About 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go out into the vineyard." When the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landlord, saying, "The last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give the last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Nobody, if they lost their ball, they didn't want to go in there, and the kids would kind of wander over where they weren't supposed to go, and they would find golf balls every once in a while, and they thought it was great. And so they said, well, let's get intentional about doing this. Let's go over and let's get as many golf balls as we can, and let's sell them back to the golfers. And so they formed this little corporation. And they talked about the rules, and they said, okay, let's have at least one rule, and it'll be the golden rule of the company. And the rule was that no matter how many balls each person found, they would split the profits equally. And that was pretty good. I thought that was a good rule. I was listening into all this, and so off they went. And they went over to the golf course. About an hour later, they came back. Their pockets were bulging. They had their T-shirts out, and they had, a trough of all these balls, 34 balls. And they got out a little wash tub, and they started scrubbing those down, and they were just beautiful. And they went around campus, and they got these egg cartons. And they put the balls in each, they had the Titleist in one egg carton and the Maxiflies in another, and they were all perfectly arranged. Oh, they were so proud of them. And they go back to the golf course, and again they said, let's remind each other of the golden rule. My son had gotten about 2/3 of the balls, and so I'm going to say, I can't wait to see how this plays out. Well, they come back, they earn $14. That's big for seminary. It was, I wanted to get in on it in seminary. But $14. And so we listened in to see how they were going to, do this. And sure enough, they stayed to the golden rule. They said, we're going to divide it up. And we were so proud of them, we flipped in a $1 bill. And so it came out so that, $15, 3 of them, $5 a piece. It was great. Well, about a week and a half later, the company met. The profits were down. The shareholders were asking for more and more money. And so they decided that, what they needed to do was go back over on the golf course. Well, the word about this company had spread across campus, and there was another one of their friends. Her name was Catherine, and she wanted to get in on it. And so, they said, okay, I just want you to know the golden rule of the company, that is, that we share no matter what. Well, the next day they went out, and unfortunately my daughter Becky had to stay at school for a little bit, and then Rachel had to go to a track meet later on, so she had to leave early, and my daughter had to wait a little bit, and so they weren't there the entire time. And by this time, those easy balls had been picked over, and so it got to be a lot fewer balls, and they had to work a lot harder, and they had the scars to show for it. And, when they came back and they sold all the balls, they only got $3. Well, my son was a little bit upset about that. And, he was the oldest and far better in math and deviousness. And so he came up with a brand new rule. He said, there were two of us that were here all day long, or all the searching time together, and we have the scars to prove it. And he said, so we should get $1 a piece, and the two that were here for short periods of time should only get 50 cents a piece. Well, it was the first brawl of that boardroom that they had ever had, and it was loud. And so my daughter came to me and said, I want to make sure that, you rule on this. Well, before I could do that, my daughter decided, she was the youngest in the company. She was also the treasurer of the company. And so she came up with this idea. She says, I'm going to give Catherine all of the money, because she was not a part of the group before this, and we want to make her feel like, she's part of the team. And so not only will we give her all $3, but we'll pledge the next $2 that we earn to her so that she feels an equal partner. My son blew his top. You can imagine. And so they come to dinner. They are going through dinner. They're angry with each other at dinner, and they say, we're going to have a family meeting. It was like a judicial hearing. And we got done, and they said, so what do you think, Dad? Well, I was in seminary, and so I was learning I was taking this homiletics class, the teaching of preaching class, and they were talking about a homiletic technique called narrative preaching, where you tell stories like I'm doing right now. And he said, sometimes, when you tell stories, you can let a truth kind of come out in the story and just linger out. And just like Jesus did, sooner or later that truth touches your heart and it changes you. So I said, I'm going to use this as a narrative moment. And so I said, hey kids, I just want to tell you a story. It's a story from the gospel. It's a story that you just heard. And the story goes, and I told them, I said, I want you to hear this story. It's this landowner who is very rich, has a large vineyard, and he knows that he has to get this harvest in. And so he goes down to the place where all the workers hang out, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, he gets some workers. And he says, I'm going to pay you a full day's wage, a denarius. And they were excited, just like when I offered the treats today. I said, how do you feel about that handful of candy? Oh, great, this is wonderful. Oh, they were that. They were just, this is wonderful. And then, he comes back and there's still more idle people. And at 9 o'clock, he hires some more. And at noon, he hires some more. And at 3 o'clock, he hires some more. And then he comes back at 5 o'clock and he sees there's still people sitting there. He is gracious enough, loving enough. He says, okay, I'm going to get all these other ones there, so come along. And they only work an hour. And so when they are done, when the harvest is in, the landowner says, now line everybody up and I'm going to pay them. And I loved when you got that little twitch in your voice and, it made it sound like, oh, we're going to get something more. When the first ones got paid a whole denarius, oh, they were, the rest of them were just licking their lips. They were saying, just think what we're going to get. And the ones that had been there all day, we're going to get 12 times. I imagine they were already thinking about what they were going to use that money for. And when it came their turn, he gave them 1 denarius. And he says, what's wrong with that? They were angry, they were mumbling, they were grumbling, and they were angry with him. And he says, what is wrong? Did I hurt you in some way? Did I not live up to my obligation? Weren't you happy? Why are you not happy now? What happened? Just like I asked in children's moment, what happened? And it was, I'm jealous. I'm envious. It's not fair. And so I told that, and I said to my son, did you hear the story? And he said, yeah, at least they all got paid. And so up to the room he went, and my daughter said, okay, this is ridiculous. And so I said, why don't you give me a few more minutes, and I'm going to think about this. So I started thinking about her, my youngest daughter. Here she is, the youngest one of them all, and she understands the power of generosity to build relationships and to build community. I started thinking about how I, as a parent, struggle with that whole idea of compared to what? Compared. Why am I get all caught up in comparisons? Why do I think that life is unfair at times? Why am I jealous of somebody else's talents and somebody else's efforts? Why? I said, this is a huge concept. Why is it so hard for us to understand? Because not fair really comes from where we start looking at life. At what level do we start to look at life? If we look at life from the vantage point of entitlement, I deserve, then that means we go through a whole process, a whole litany of comparisons. It's one comparison after another. When we look at life as entitlement, then that means when you have a success, I'm jealous. Or when you have a great reward, then I'm jealous because I look at it as limited, and it's not limited. But when you look at life as gift, pure gift, it changes your life. It changes your perspective. It means that every day becomes a gift. Every hour is windfall. And it changes it from entitlement to gratitude. And you start to see life in a new way. And so I went and read one of my favorite authors, this John Claypool. And he had this story. And so I called the kids back. And I said, I'd like to tell you another story, and I hope that I don't disappoint you in this story. And the story goes, there was this very young farmer, and he and his wife were, living back in the days in Israel. And he was very, very poor. And one night as they were sleeping in their small house, the angel of the Lord came to him and said, you have found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And the Lord would like to bless you as he blessed your forefather Abraham. And he would like to give you 3 wishes. But there is a clause. He says, whatever you get, your neighbor will get twice of. Oh, this young farmer was so excited, and because they were so poor, he woke up his wife and he told her about the visitation of the angel, and then said, let's figure out what we want, because we could come out of poverty and we could become rich. And so they came up with the idea of 1,000 head of cattle that would make him rich. And so he summoned the angel and he says, we would like 1,000 head of cattle. And sure enough, when they woke up in the morning, there was this beautiful, magnificent herd all around their house. Oh, he was so happy. For the next 2 days, his feet couldn't touch the ground. He was bouncing up and down and just running through the cattle. And on the 3rd day, he goes up on the hillside looking down on his little farm, and he wants to see where he can put a barn. And so he's up there on the hillside, and he's just so filled with joy. And suddenly he hears this ruckus over on the neighbor's area, and he looks down and hears 2,000 head of cattle. And all that joy just turned to darkness. And he comes stomping on down the hillside and into the house, and he slams the door, and he goes into the bedroom and doesn't say a word. He's that angry. So in the middle of the night, he realizes and remembers he has 2 more wishes. And so he starts to think, what do I need? What do I really need? He says, now I've got cattle. I need to have an heir. We haven't been able to have children. I need a son. And so he summons the angel and says, I request a son. And so he wakes up his wife one more time, not to discuss about, what we're going to get, but to make sweet love. And sure enough, about 3 or 4 weeks later, she said, I think I'm getting pregnant. And I'm pregnant. Not getting pregnant, I'm pregnant. Yeah, it works that way. Yeah, so I'm pregnant. And then 9 months later, she delivers this beautiful baby boy. Oh, he's on cloud 9. And so he goes to the synagogue on the next day. And in the appropriate place within the service, he says, we worship an amazing God, a God that has given so many things. And this God has given me the gift of a great son. And the rabbi says, we do have a great God because your neighbor just had twin boys. And it went from being so joyful to completely dark. And he goes home angry. And he goes into the bedroom again, and he is angry and dark all night long. And finally, he comes up with a new wish. And he summons the angel. And he says, tell the Lord, I want you to gouge out my right eye. Yeah. And the angel of the Lord said, what brought about this dark desiring? And he said, I would rather see part of my bounty than allow my neighbor to see any of his. Wow. And he looks up at the angel, and there's tears coming down the angel's face. And the angel said, I don't understand. I don't understand how you could go from something so beautiful to something so dark. What has possessed you? I want you to know that God will not grant your wish, not because he has no integrity, but because he is full of mercy. He wants you to know that what was meant for blessing you have turned to curse, and you have broken the heart of your Maker. So I looked at my son, and he says, Dad, and he goes, the more we hear about the gospel message, and the more that we hear about these parables, the harder life is to live. I said, yes, the power of narrative preaching. Yeah. And he never forgot that story. Amen.